All right, if everyone would kindly take their seats, we'll get started. Oh, yeah. Good evening. If everybody could please take their seats, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Jody Filardo, and I work for Albemarle County. We're pleased to welcome you to this session where we're going to talk all things transportation. This evening, I'd like to introduce some of the folks in the room so that you kind of know who's here. First, I'd like to introduce my staff. I've got Kevin McDermott, who's our acting planning director. I've got Jessica Hirsch-Ballering, who's our principal planner. And I've got Amelia McCulley, who's our special projects manager over there. We're kind of spread out a little bit for you tonight. In addition, I'd like to introduce our supervisors, but before I do, I wanted to let you know they are here in listening mode only because 3 of them are in the room. They cannot answer questions. It's one of those legal things. So I will be very pleased to introduce them to you, and you can talk to them individually on a break or afterwards, but please not in this meeting. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chair Donna Price. In addition, I can see she's sitting next to Supervisor Diantha McKeel. And then got Vice Chair Jim Andrews over here. Thank you very much. And we are so pleased to have a great team of VDOT experts here tonight. We have first and foremost, Sean Nelson over here, Culpeper District Engineer. Next to him, we have Lou Hatter, who's Culpeper District Communications Manager. And I see Abby Stumpf. I'm so sorry, Abby. Part of our communications team, our communications manager for Albemarle County. Then we've got Ed I always want to change your name. I know I want to make you San Gregorio, but that's not right. San Nicholas, and he is the acting residency administrator. And tonight you're going to be hearing from Troy Austin, who is our traffic operations director. He'll be making our presentation. And we have another VDOT guy here who I don't know.
Nathan Umberger with ATCS. We were the consultant for this project.
So thank you all. Okay, so I just wanted to share a little bit of information about what we are going to do tonight. Based on feedback from, I think, many of you in this room, we have actually expanded this meeting a little bit. Initially, when we set this meeting up, we thought we were going to speak about just one particular project. And that wasn't going to be addressing concerns that we have heard from you all as we've been talking with each of you and reading emails and all kinds of things. So instead, tonight, what we are going to do is hear from the VDOT team, and they're going to explain a much bigger picture of what we are addressing in this area. What we are not going to be talking about, though, is a project that we have coming before the supervisors on March 1st, Old Ivy Residences. So if we start going down that pathway, I'm going to pull us all back, because we're really here to talk about VDOT solutions and the array of VDOT solutions. That's an independent other project. So if you would kind of bear with us and we'll kind of stay with the transportation topic, that would be fabulous. With no further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Sean Nelson, who is going to give some introductory remarks for the VDOT team.
Thanks, Jody. So I appreciate you all coming out tonight. I hear there's a Who's game tonight at 7:30, so we kind of need to get through this. But first, kind of to what Jody had mentioned, this was rolled out as an interim solution to a problem that has been faced in this area for a while now. Didn't just happen yesterday. And hearing your feedback, I think we kind of missed the mark of laying out, if this is an interim solution, well, what's the permanent solution? How does it impact the entire area? So we may have failed on that. So tonight, what we plan to do is to go over in this presentation all the items that have been looked at throughout the years. And the goal is at the end of this to get feedback from you all on what you've seen, but then moving forward, there is an opportunity that we're seeking right now to do another study, which is called a pipeline study. So the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, which reports to the Secretary of Transportation, they administer these pipeline studies, and these pipeline studies are aimed to give multiple solutions to problems that lay out a roadmap to allow you to then seek funding through Smart Scale or other avenues. So the goal would be for us, we've already seeking an application to look at this corridor in the interchange and the bypass to figure out what is the suite of projects needed to solve the issues long-term. So, but what you will see, I will remind you that the things that Troy's going to talk about will likely come up in that pipeline study because they could be viable options if paired with other things. So that pipeline study, when it's done, there's public outreach that is done. There are multiple public meetings that are had to kind of vet these things, which gives the county and the department the assurance that the public, one, likes what's being presented and it can be proposed through Smart Scale or through other funding processes. So Troy's going to present what we've had, the triangle about concept and everything else that we have looked at over the years in this area. And the goal would be through this pipeline studies to kind of lay all this out of how we can solve this problem for most of the communities that use these roadways throughout this area.
I'm so sorry, but I forgot to tell you all, we are actually recording this meeting. So we have cameras on in this room, both on us and on you all, so that we will have a record of all of your questions. We're going to try to take notes as best we can, but I'm not I can't listen and take notes at the same time. So I just wanted to let you all know that we're doing that. And so smile pretty and make sure you state your name and things like that so we can get back to you if we have any questions or we couldn't figure out what it was you said when you were asking a question. So thank you, Sean, he's going to finish up his remarks, then Troy will come up, and then we're going to open it for comments and questions. And we'll be monitoring the mics, and we'll come over to you and stick the mic in your face so you can talk, and then we'll go to the next person. So thank you. I'm sorry I forgot to give directions while I was up here earlier. Thank you.
No problem. So what Troy's going to present is what we've looked at thus far. That may not be what we end up looking at in the future because there's a potential for maybe rebuilding the interchange, which requires rebuilding 2 bridges and doing something with the railroad, which is a very expensive project. But we will try to consider all these when looking at the pipeline and try to lay it out to the community of what the options are and which way we want to move forward. So that is my spiel, and I'll turn it over to Troy now.
Now can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, don't clap yet. Because wait till the end and I'm sure we'll have a lot to clap about. So, we wanted to kind of start off how we got to where we're at. Most of the folks around Old Garth Road, ramp that comes off the bypass down St. Anne's Belfield, Old Ivy, Faulkner Road, the triangle, and the issue 50 signal. Obviously, there's yes.
1 second.
Can you use this?
You all here?
Okay, is that better? Okay. So, when we started looking at this, our focus was with the long queues associated with signal at 250 and the ramp. And the way Sometimes it backs up onto the bypass. This backup from the intersection creates a lot of congestion in this entire area. So back in January of 2021, we issued a notice to proceed to ATCS to start looking at the area to help us develop ways to address this very specific problem. And that grew. If you heard the Board of Supervisors presentation, I referred to this problem as a whack-a-mole problem, and ATCS came up with that. That is not my concept, but truly, every time solving one problem in one location, it created another issue at a different location. For such a small network of roads, it's actually pretty complicated in the way it behaves, and we started running into problems. So really had to tune in on what we were going to try solving. This is just a study. It was the initial study that we did. And what we did was use this to it was really a screening tool to decide what we were going to move further into further study with. As you'll see here in a couple slides, we looked at many things. This is not the only concept we looked at. There were many other alternatives in it. And I see a lot of people taking notes about the slides and all. I meant to say this up front. Our plan is this presentation, we're going to post it to the website. So any will be able to get this presentation later. It might make it easier for you. So the goal of this study that we did is we wanted to develop a relatively low cost funding option that was going to improve safety and operation in the area. Now, that being said, we understand and we understood all along that this is a much bigger problem in the entire corridor. The issue is those funding scenarios take a much longer time to get approved and get allocated. So we were trying to figure out if there's anything that we can do as an interim project to make some difference in the area. So that was 100% the goal of the study. Now, we identified interim solutions and long-term solutions in the study with the understanding that long-term solutions take a scale level project, which anybody that's familiar with it, I mean, you're talking 2, 6, 8 years out. I mean, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. We were trying to figure out what can we do right now to make some difference in the area. Now, what we had to do, some of the things that we were dealing with when we're studying this is we needed to look at all growth that we were aware of. Jody had mentioned the development on Old Ivy. That did not have any bearing on our study other than the proposed trips that they were going to be generating. We did take the trips that they're saying that development's going to generate, and we took that into account of our modeling so that we had a complete model looking at everything that's going to happen out there. The other issues we have are obviously the physical limitations. You have the railroad overpass. You have Bel Air Market. You have the structures across the bypass that, for us to do a whole lot on the bypass, those bridges need to be rebuilt. You guys are familiar with the ramps coming off of the lanes coming off the ramps. There's no lane there. And you have the same thing with coming off the bypass, trying to come up to the signal and the Cloverleaf. There's no ramp there. But the problem is we can't just extend those ramp or those lanes without rebuilding the bridges. So it's a very physically constrained area with a lot of things that are working against us. So when the study we were working on it, you always have to start with getting traffic counts. We took counts from 2019, so prior to the pandemic, because we all know traffic volumes dropped. We took them from 2019 and we grew those turning movements out to 2030. So we're basically looking at 11 years of growth when we're modeling it. These are the preliminary concepts that made it into the study. I can tell you there were several more that we screened out that never even made it to the study. These guys, they were really doing a good job of thinking outside the box, because what we have found is we live in a world where we quickly cannot build our way out of congestion. It's just not a sustainable thing. So we're having to look at alternatives. Most of this is through operational changes, but we have to come up with creative ways of dealing with this congestion and the growth in traffic volume that is not necessarily just adding lanes. That's not a sustainable model at this point. But some of the things that we looked at, and I will go into these in more detail on the coming slides. We looked at a free flow right turn from Old Garth Road onto 250 westbound. This would be a lane that would not stop. Cars could always go. We looked at a through cut for the side streets, basically Old Garth and Canterbury Drive. And again, I will get into more detail about each one of these, you know, what they are. We looked at dual through lanes for 250 eastbound. And you could see that I labeled basically whether we were looking at these as short-term interim type projects or whether they were going to be the longer-term projects that are going to address the issues of the entire corridor. You got free flow right from Old Garth Road and a through cut, which is just a combination of a couple. We looked at an R cut at the intersection. We looked at a roundabout at the intersection. And again, you know, I'll start digging into why we moved away from some of these things. What we quickly found when we were modeling this, and from the traffic counts, we already knew this, there is a very high movement at the signal of vehicles coming off Old Garth, wanting to turn right to go west on 250. Some of those folks are going to Crozet. Some of those folks are probably you guys sitting in the room, going to White Gables, going to Farmington, going to Boar's Head. You know, everybody knows that it is much quicker to do that. And that's the reason people go that way. So we were trying to deal with that movement in particular. One of the things that worked really well was this free flow right turn. I mean, you can see in the notes, I mean, we were able to reduce the delay in the AM from 44 seconds per vehicle down to 26 seconds per vehicle. In operations, that is an enormous decrease in time. I'll admit it, I'm not an expert on modeling, but I can assure you that is reductions that you don't see from many alternatives. So that was the biggest pro with this. You know, we were looking at being able to do this without having to get any additional right-of-way. And it's relatively low cost. Most of it is phasing with the signal and pavement markings. So we could do this pretty cheaply, pretty quickly, and we got great benefits. The problem is this free flow movement, and I'll take ownership for this. I felt that it was going to create a lot of burden on vehicles trying to get into the Bel Air market. I don't think we had a very good solution on how to deal with the vehicles that actually wanted to turn into the market. So I won't say quickly because we discussed this one quite a bit, but we just could not come up with a good alternative. So we moved on from this option, but I can tell you this option performed better than most of the things we looked at. Another option that was looked at is what's called a through cut. And I don't have a good example of a location to show you one of these. This is from VDOT's website for alternative intersections. And the general idea is you do not allow the through movement from the side streets. So from Canterbury to Old Garth and vice versa. You would not be able to go straight through either way. What that lets you do is run the left turns at the same time. So you're able to reallocate some of the green time on the signal to the heavier movements. Now, obviously you could do this pretty easily. It's pavement marking and timings at the signal. And so it's very low cost. You don't need any additional right of way. This didn't go very well I was not interested in moving forward with it because this truly is a real burden to the folks with over in Bel Air subdivision. I mean, this was very much restricting all of those drivers, and it just did not seem like a real viable option. The other thing is, if we did this without that free flow right, the benefit we were seeing was relatively minimal because you still had to have a phase for those left turns. You still had to let the vehicles make the left turns. So yes, there was benefit there, but really it took the free flow right movement to really make it worthwhile. And probably one of the biggest issues is there's really no way of doing this without restricting pedestrian crossings on 250, because pretty much at all times, there are going to be cars moving across that crosswalk. So there's not a good way of putting this into effect and still allow pedestrian crossing. The next one we looked at was the dual right turn lanes. I think most of you have seen this or heard about this in one form or another at this point. This is essentially the concept that we have on the boards. You can look at the benefits to the level of service. I mean, we're going from if 44 seconds down to 26 seconds is great. With this movement, we're able to go down from 44 down to 13 and a half. The queue length in the morning goes from 429 to 195. So we saw great benefits with this. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with this because I think most of you are familiar with this. I will say the biggest con with it is it does eliminate that through movement from Old Garth to Bel Air. It also prevents the left turns from Old Garth to go towards Charlottesville. But other than that, this is operationally a very good alternative. We looked at an R-cut. This is actually the Google Earth overhead view of the one that is actually built up on 29 North at North Point subdivision. So if you want to see one that is built and how it works, it's out there in 29 north of Airport Road. You know, we don't have, it's not built out. That development's not built out yet. So volumes are going to be heavier at some point. But basically, in order to make a left turn, you have to make a right turn and then go somewhere and make a U-turn to go back. This, you know, the safety is improved with this because you're reducing the number of conflict points because you're limiting the types of movements at the intersection. The operation, and I have an eastbound US 250. I mean, basically that traffic would never stop. They wouldn't have a signal at all. You may have to, well, really, the westbound traffic probably wouldn't stop either. You know, that would take more evaluation to see whether or not we actually had to put a signal out there for some of these movements. But the through movement greatly improves. The cons with this is it is high cost. We would have to identify a funding source, probably a smart scale level project. We would probably need to obtain right of way for the U-turn locations. But the biggest problem we ran into is we couldn't find any location that really lent itself well to a U-turn movement, because you really need a U-turn on both sides of the intersection. And if you go east towards Charlottesville, the right of way from the railroad starts running very close to the right of way for the road. And we just could not identify a place where we could build a U-turn where vehicles could use it there. So it potentially could be done, but this is going to be a challenging one to try getting done. Next to this, and in fact, probably better than the triangle about concept operationally, is a roundabout at this intersection. You know, I'm not going to go through the levels of service and all that stuff. You can see it. You'll be able to see it later if you download the presentation. But the operations is greatly improved. Three big problems with this. It's very expensive to build roundabouts. One of the reasons it's very expensive to build them is because they take a lot of right of way. The other problem we're going to have is, I think that this one is really going to have an impact on Bel Air Market. So, you know, we have to figure out those types of things. But the bottom line is, this is not something that we could have afforded to do quickly without going through some other funding source. This was actually what was identified in the study as the long-term solution. This is what really needs to go out there if you really want to improve operations out there and safety. Again, we were trying to figure on the local level, what can we do now? But we want to know, what is it likely to look like in the future? And this is what we agreed with the consultants in the study, that this is really the long-term answer to this location. So that was the intersection out at, oh no, I got a couple other things. The dual through lanes for US 250. So you'll notice when you get to the signal, you're going eastbound on 250. Once you go through the signal, there's two lanes, two through lanes. But coming from the west, from Crozet, there's only one lane. We looked at adjusting the median, doing some restriping, and actually having two lanes go all the way through. There's some benefit to it, but primarily this helps during the AM peak hour. Other than that, you don't get a whole lot of benefit from it. The free flow right turn from Old Garth onto 250 westbound and through cut. Again, where you're getting the real benefit there is from the free flow right. The through cut does give you some benefit, but it does restrict that through movement from Canterbury to Old Garth and vice versa. And there's some benefit to doing that, but the majority of the benefit with that option came from the free flow right. Then we started looking at, again, this goes back to the whole whack-a-mole thing. Everything we did down here was going to have impacts to this triangle area. So we started looking at ways to try addressing some of those issues. And rather than reading through all these, like I say, you will be able to do that later if you want. I'll just go into some of the concepts we looked at. We looked at rerouting the ramp so that it comes down Faulkner instead of going down straight like it does now and go to the Old Ivy and Old Garth intersection. What this primarily does is it removes the conflicts from the folks coming out of Stab with the folks coming off the bypass. You know, I call it minimal cost. There is, you know, we might have to build an island there, or there will be definitely some pavement marking, signage, possibly a little bit of asphalt, maybe even a little bit of right of way, but it's not on the magnitude of like building a roundabout. The big issue with this is just mainly moving your backup from the folks coming off of the bypass. It moves it down to the intersection of Faulkner and Old Ivy. And then most of them are going to be backing up from Old Ivy, trying to make the left onto Old Garth to go out to the signal. So we're inserting additional stops for the heavy movement. And the congestion coming off the ramp is likely to still be there. It does separate the congestion coming out of the school. That is the one very big plus that it does. This is kind of another version of reworking the whole ramp and basically rerouting it all down to Old Faulkner and Old Ivy. To make this work, we were looking at an additional signal at that intersection, which has problems in itself. But this is still not really doing a whole lot to get the queue down from the traffic coming off of the bypass. We looked at a roundabout at that intersection, which worked pretty well. It's got the pros of all roundabouts. You're removing conflict points, so it is definitely a safer intersection. It is a higher cost. You know, we would likely need right away for that. And the big problem with this is if there is any congestion downstream from the signal, once it starts backing up towards the roundabout, it creates real issues with the roundabout, and it pretty much shuts down the whole intersection, the whole operation. So that is something that you have to deal with. I don't know. I mean, we looked at potentially creating 2 T intersections out there. Again, you're just moving the problem to another intersection. You're creating another issue. T intersections are generally safer than 4-way intersections simply because it's fewer conflict points, but you're just adding another conflict point. Then we ran into or came up with the idea of the triangle about, which essentially functions very similar to a roundabout, just a very big roundabout. This is the concept that, I presented to the board of supervisors. This is the one that we've been floating. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add to it at this point, unless you guys have questions, but basically you're coming off the bypass, same direction you've always gone. One thing I will say, let's talk about some of the movements involved with this. If you're coming from 250, whether you're making a right or a left and you want to get to Stab, you're going the exact same way that you have to go to today. You go up to the intersection of Old Garth and Old Ivy, and you have to make a right, and then you go to Faulkner and you make a left, which is the exact same movement that this is. The one difference is where a lot of folks, when they leave, they want to cut straight across and go down Faulkner, you would have to turn right, go down to the intersection of Old Garth and Old Ivy, and then make the left or continue straight, whichever way you want to go. But to get to Stab from really any direction, you're doing exactly what you do today. Okay, we can do that. Just real quick, after we had that first study, there was a second study that was done by ATCS. The notice to proceed was in August of 2022. We expanded what we were analyzing to see this impact on more of the area. This shows the area, the intersections that we considered to see what the impacts were from this proposal. But at the end of the day, this was, the intersections shown up here is where the primary focus of what we were trying to address. These are the locations. This slide is in there for full disclosure. These movements, these 12, this is during the PM or the peak hours. The movements that are going straight across and making the left, they would have to go a different way. Whether it's stay on the bypass and hit the clover leaves, or whether it's to go down Old Ivy, they would have to find a different way to go. But you can see relatively, it's a small number compared to the number of vehicles making that right turn. This is just something else that demonstrates where the traffic volumes were changed, where they're getting rerouted. I know you probably can't even see that from where you're at, but if you have questions when you download this, don't hesitate to contact me. This shows the orange and the solid lines is basically where the rerouted trips would go for those that wanted to go straight or wanted to go left at the signal. There's a bunch of slides in here that you need to spend some time looking at them. Once is where we expect the queues to be in 2030 if you do nothing. Then it shows where the queues will be, the back of the queue will be on an average day. That's the other thing to keep in mind. This is on an average day. There are times that we know that it will be further than what's shown. But then it also shows what it'll be if we do this project. And then there's a third line that shows if you do a couple little tweaks to that project, it makes it even better. There's several of these slides in here, so, you know, spend some time looking at them. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah. This talks about the levels of service. Now, this is looking at 250 and Old Garth. We have this type of information for every one of those intersections that we analyze. So if there's, you want to see the benefits and the reduction in the level of service, we can show that to you. But highlighting the problem intersection, this is the benefits we were seeing. So, and I'm just going to hit on this real quickly. Sean had mentioned the project pipeline study, and just to recap it some, it is overseen by OIP, Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. It is not overseen by VDOT. The study is a performance-based planning and programming document. It helps lead us into making decisions on which projects we want to advance to smart scale and things like that. And typically it focuses on regional needs and not necessarily the local needs, but we do get local input during the process. We want to solve as many problems as we can with this effort. The tentative schedule for this is they're anticipating to present the list of proposed study projects to the CTB in March, so next month. The studies could potentially begin in April or May of this year, and they want to have the studies complete by the spring of next year so that they can be used to make decisions on round 6 of the smart scale process. So there are many questions and concerns that we knew or we have heard, and I wanted to try addressing some of those now. The first one is, if the principal motivation for this project is to eliminate dangerous backups onto the US 29, US 250 bypass, is it possible to extend the deceleration lane for the off-ramp? Basically, out on the bypass, extend that lane. The short answer is yes. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because what you're doing is you're essentially building a lane for cars to set in. You're not addressing the problem in the area. The concern I have with it, there's a couple concerns. One, we definitely have to do some investigation on the shoulder, because there's paved shoulder out there, to make sure it's adequate for vehicular traffic. When you look at a roadway, the paved shoulders have a different pavement structure than the main line typically. But when you build these lanes, it needs to be the same structure. So we have to evaluate that to determine if that shoulder needs to be rebuilt to extend these lanes. That's something that's more expensive than what my budget can handle. You're dealing with finding some other funding source. The big question or big concern I have is oftentimes having vehicles that are queued up and stopped next to moving traffic can potentially create safety issues for the people on the main line. They start watching the vehicles to the side. They're not paying attention to what's going on in front of them. And then heaven forbid, if they are distracted and they hit a vehicle that's stopped in that queue, those crashes tend to be more severe because of your speed differential. So there are issues with simply having lanes where you anticipate cars being sitting there. Then the other thing you have is, if you have folks in this lane and they get impatient, they may just weave back out into traffic without paying attention to the through traffic going by. So yes, you could do that, but you're essentially building a parking space for cars without solving the issue and potentially creating other issues. Another question that was posed to us is, how can adding an additional lane that can only accommodate 4 to 5 vehicles have such a dramatic impact on the queue length? This might be one I may have to get my good friend from ATCS to weigh in on some, but what you have to keep in mind is 4 to 5 cars equates to about 100 feet of queue. That signal is going to cycle 30 times over the peak hour. So essentially, you're not reducing the queue by 100 feet. Over that hour, you're reducing the queue by 3,000. And we anticipate that you're going to get more benefit than just 4 or 5 cars going through there from this being a dual lane, because that is just the car sitting there. We anticipate that once cars get up to this dual lane, some of them are going to move over and utilize that. So during each cycle, you're going to see more than 4 to 5 cars go through there. Another concern that was expressed was perhaps the explanation for the reduced queue lengths in the study is not 2 right turn lanes, but instead eliminating the light cycles needed for the other traffic movements, the left turns and the through traffic. This is difficult to understand because cars turning left or going straight rarely obstruct right turning traffic. And when cars are turning left or going straight, the right lane has a protected free flow movement onto westbound 250. Essentially, the problem is you're still serving the phase. You can say no left turns allowed, but you still have the phase for the through movement. So you're not really gaining very much in terms of cycle length by saying you can't make left turns there. You know, the light cycles are primarily driven by that right turn movement. So if you're making the light stay green to allow the right turning vehicles to go, you might as well let the vehicles turn left. You're not really gaining a whole lot by doing that, if any. The presentation refers to various mitigation measures that appear to reduce queue lengths when implemented with the dual right turn lane concept. Would those mitigation measures by themselves improve conditions sufficiently to remove the need for the more dramatic reconfiguration of traffic flows presented by the proposed project? The answer to that is no. What the mitigation measures do is address some of the whack-a-mole concepts from doing this. We get great benefit by doing this alone, but we can build on it with the mitigation measures. The mitigation measures do nothing to address the right turning vehicles off of Old Garth under 250. And that's what the issue is, the high volume of vehicles turning right. Are there operational benefits to preserving the through movement to Canterbury Road while eliminating the left turns? I think I kind of talked about that already. Maybe I didn't answer the other one correctly, but again, you're serving the right turning cars off of Old Garth to go to 250 West. That's what's dictating the signal timing at the intersection. So if you're serving them, you might as well let the left turns go as well. How does this project impact bicycle and pedestrian safety? So we don't have the funding available to us. And I keep saying that, but let me back up and explain how this project is going to be funded. The plan was to fund this out of my operating budget. We were planning on rebuilding the signal anyway, which is the expensive part of all this project. The rest of it is pavement marking and signage, maybe very little asphalt work. So I felt like I could absorb that in my operating budget using state forces to do the work. So we could easily afford that without having to find one of these alternative funding scenarios. My budget cannot cover providing pedestrian and bicycle facilities that do not exist. I do not have that kind of money in my budget. What I can say is nothing we're doing will change the availability of bikes and peds to use the area. There's a crosswalk out there on 250 now at the signal. That's still going to be there after this is done. I know I was asked the question once, bicyclists like to use Old Ivy, take Old Garth down to the signal, make a left there to go back to Charlottesville. You could still do that. They may just have to go across the crosswalk to get over on the eastbound lanes to ride back into Charlottesville. There's nothing that we're doing out here that is prohibiting or limiting what bicyclists and pedestrians and bicyclists can already do out there. If improvements reduce queue and delay as presented, would additional drivers use this route as opposed to using I-64 to access US 250 westbound and consequently making egress from the White Gables area more difficult? I can't definitively say what drivers are going to do if this goes in. You have some folks that may change their driving patterns and come and use this. You may have more that want to go down to the interstate. I can't accurately predict that. I could tell you when these guys did the modeling, they made some assumptions with the trip allocations that some drivers would change their patterns and go different ways. But what they didn't do is we did not intentionally divert any trips to this intersection and make right turns to go west on 250. So essentially, the cars that are doing it today are the cars that are going to be doing it if it gets built. I think there are probably some things that we could do around the White Gables area. I could tell you, I spent a couple hours out there last week from 3 to 5, just sitting and watching traffic come out of White Gables. And what I witnessed was cars generally had very little difficulty in making that. Now I want to spend more time out there from 4 to 6 because I know that volumes get higher, but I can tell you, and I wrote notes, I jotted down, I had my stopwatch and I was watching. There was one vehicle that it took them 2 minutes to get out. So they sat there a while. There was another one. And when I say get out, I'm talking about making left turns. Let's be straight with that. I'm talking about making left turns. I watched another vehicle. It took them 50 seconds. But other than that, the 10, 12 vehicles that I watched in about a half-hour period were able to make that left turn in about 15 seconds or less. Though I was there 3 to 5. I said, as I said, now we'll have comments and questions later, but I did say I want to spend more time out there from 4 to 6 because I know that traffic changes, but I had to leave for another meeting. So you're right. I do need to spend more time out there. But what I saw repeatedly was the vehicles that were able to make that left turn quickly were making a left turn out into the two-way left turn lane. The ones that it took a long time to make the left turn was waiting for a gap in both directions on 250. Those were the ones that were having to wait. Okay, but hold on. We'll have an opportunity. We'll have an opportunity for comments and concerns later. And as I said, I know that I need to spend more time out there watching. This was that 2-hour window. But what I was saying is, if we install something that we refer to as a green T, go ahead and take that center lane that the drivers that were using it to get out quickly and protect it. Put up some kind of barrier so that they don't have to worry about the through traffic going eastbound. Give them a refuge area where they can pull out to it, pull up slowly, and then merge back over into traffic. That is what I watched the vehicles who were getting out quickly. That's exactly what they were doing. That was the exact movement. An example of this is an example of where we have done this successfully. This is coming off of the interstate. It's the westbound ramp at exit, I think it's 121. It's Route 20. And you can see that we did that exact thing. There used to be 2 lanes coming out of Charlottesville. We took one of those lanes and we created a refuge area so that people coming off of the ramp only had to watch traffic in one direction and then get over into this protected lane. And it has worked wonderfully. Traffic gets off of that ramp. We haven't had crashes. It has worked great. This is something that I think that we could do at White Gables that would greatly help. If we went this route, it's relatively low cost and we could do it really quickly. I'm just saying, I think there are options out there to help with the situation. But the bottom line is, as it relates to this project, we're not expecting that the number of vehicles that come through in that peak hour to increase. It's going to be the same number of cars during the peak hour that you see today coming through after this is built. So that is the end of my presentation. that was the last slide. So I'll let Abby take over.
All right, so we are about 40 minutes out before we have to finish. So I'm going to ask that you raise your hand if you have a comment or question, and I will bring the mic over to you. Please, after you've asked your question or made your comment, please hand me the mic back so I can start working to the next person and we can kind of keep this going as quickly as possible. And lastly, I'll say that at about 5 minutes to the end, I'll call last question. And I know that Troy and others have their contact information available. So if we don't get to all of your questions, there are opportunities for you to get them. All right.
Well, thank you, Troy, for that presentation. It's helpful. My name is Paul Sullivan. I'm the president of the Kenridge HOA, which I think you keep referring to the White Gables
I agree.
because they use our exit. Before I start, I'd like people in my neighborhood just to raise their hands. I have a pretty strong opinionated group. And our opinion is, if you do this, the merging lanes in front of the Whedon office building is going to make it impossible to get out of our neighborhood on many, many occasions. And you said you sat there for a couple hours. I agree with you, but I'm telling you, it is a crapshoot. And most of us will not go into that center lane and wait, because not only is, we call it the suicide lane, because a lot of traffic comes up from the market, turns left across from our neighborhood onto Boar's Head Road now and do a U-turn. So when you're trying to get out of our neighborhood, the traffic is coming from 4 different directions randomly, and it is literally a crapshoot. And frankly, it's only going to get worse unless we solve this problem the way it should be, as a system from all the way from Foods of Our Nations all the way up through Edmond. Otherwise, you're just wasting our time and your time. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm LF. I live also in Kenridge, and I'm the developer of White Gables 2, which are 42 new residences being built in the same area. And Kenridge and White Gables are sort of a large community with 2 different ways to get in and out of there. Paul talked about one. There's another at White Gables. But, you know, I think, and how many people are here from White Gables? I think there are a number of White Gables folks here as well. So Kenridge and White Gables are here. We met with you, and we've, you know, had meetings on this very issue. And you've been very sympathetic, but we're still struggling. And I think all of us who are here have had experiences that we hope we never have again, trying to get out of Kenridge or out of White Gables, or in some cases coming from the west, perhaps into. And I think, Troy, one of the concerns is you say that there's no more traffic that will be going by us after this plan than before. But you've also said in the past that it's no more traffic, but you hope to get it through there faster, which means velocity per minute or traffic per minute will be more in order to make that happen. What we do now is we wait for small gaps in the traffic, and then we dart out in the road and hope nobody hits us, quite frankly. And I think what you're doing is saying, okay, we're going to fill in those gaps so that you won't have that kind of opportunity. So I'm delighted that you're here, and I appreciate what you and Kevin and Jim and others and Sean have listened, and you're trying to be helpful, because we do have a significant problem that seems to be only growing. I do have a general question though. Sean, I heard you say when we started that we were now looking more broadly and we were going to be doing a long-term study. I took that to mean we're not going to be pursuing this idea of two rights and a triangle about at this juncture until we had further study of more than just that area. Am I correct? Thank you very much.
And
I got, and
I've got another mic. Let me go grab it. You keep this one.
And just a couple things. I mean, I don't recall that I ever said that we were building this. I was explaining how we got to where we're at. Decided that this is, out of what we study. Now, let's talk about the vehicles more efficiently coming through the intersection. What I'm trying to explain is you got the same number of cars going through that intersection over the course of an hour. If we're able to process them quicker, instead of it taking an hour to process that many cars, maybe it takes 50 minutes. So I'm not saying that during peak hour, it's going to be hard to find gaps. What I'm saying is the time frame that pain lasts should shorten. The other thing that I will say is at the signal, we have between the phases, between 3 to 4 seconds that signal is green for every movement. All green stop. I mean, all red. I'm sorry, not green. All red stop, where every vehicle at the intersection stops, depending on which phase, between 3 and 4 seconds. Then it takes several seconds for cars to get up to speed. So what I experienced and what I saw, and I will be glad to, if anybody wants to meet me out there, to set with them, because I was parked over at the Birdwood Drive entrance. Probably some of you saw me sitting there in a little blue car. I will be glad one evening to come out there and set with you guys between 4 and 6 and watch it, because what I saw is there were several opportunities for gaps. Now, there were vehicles that it did take out. I mean, that's the reality, because drivers drive differently. But
Okay, so I know that there's a lot of hands raised. We're gonna get through these as quickly as possible. If you've already had your question addressed, please be mindful that we're trying to get to other topics as well.
Thanks, Troy. My name is Brian Spalding. I live in Huntington Village. Sean, question to you. Should we be looking at sources of funds outside of what the budget is here? And is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, we have to figure out what the plan is first, right? I mean, the goal of the pipeline studies is to arm the county with solutions and somewhat project-ready projects to apply for smart scale. That is the big funding source. There's also raise grants that are out there too. County also has an opportunity for revenue sharing, which is a 50-50 match. So there are other options out there. What Troy's talking about is literally his operating budget, which is really for the maintenance of the system that we have. It's not really for capital improvement projects. So this thing has rose as cream to the top because it was something we had money available to do like this. So, and when Troy's talking about his operating budget, he's not funding large capital projects with our operating budgets, but those funding sources are out there.
Hi, Brandon Schartz from Bel Air neighborhood. You mentioned a couple times in the known concerns the topic of still allowing southbound traffic from the interchange to cross into Bel Air neighborhood. But even with your explanations, I still didn't really understand why you couldn't have 2 right-hand turning lanes, the left of which was still allowed to proceed to Bel Air. Seems like you showed some data that like 10 out of 800 or 900 cars are proceeding straight into Bel Air. So it doesn't seem like a meaningful volume that would really, that those people going straight wouldn't really obstruct your people from turning right, as long as both of those lanes have the ability to turn as a right lane. So, it seemed like consideration for the ease of people getting into, or merging into over to Bel Air Market was enough to foil one of the plans, but the inability for people to get across that intersection at all from towards Bel Air, just completely obstructing it, seems like a loss there when 10 cars or 12 cars or whatever it was. Doesn't seem like that would really slow down your double right-hand turn. And similarly, some of the other plans, I would say that the time, the 47 seconds to 27 seconds and some of this kind of stuff is good for those individual cars, but some of these restrictions on the different plans also don't take into account that for people who can't even go a certain direction, you may be adding a lot more time. It may just not be the same volume, but it's still, if you're looking at those individual cars, it can still add, much more than 15 more seconds for that car. I know you have to look on it at it as a larger scale, but I was just hoping you could talk a little more about how that would hurt your double right-hand turn.
Sure. And the quick answer is we need the asphalt for the double lane. This is not building any new lanes. This is repurposing existing lanes. Now, let's talk about the Bel Air traffic for a second. If you live in Bel Air and you're on the bypass and you're wanting to get back to Bel Air, you would not be able to come down the ramp and go straight through. But you could just as easily stay on the bypass, use the cloverleaf, go up to the signal, make a left, and then make a left into Bel Air pretty easily. Where this restriction really comes into play is the parents that live in Bel Air and have kids over at Stab that they're going to pick up. There are more, but that's the really big one, because what they have to do, they can't get back out onto the bypass easily. What you have to do is basically go down Old Ivy to the signal and come back. There are more scenarios. I'm not disagreeing with that, but that's the one that is very noticeable. That is a real challenge to deal with. But it's not that you can't get to your subdivision. You just have to go to a different intersection. We can't keep the through movement and get the second lane. That second lane, the through lane, is becoming a right turn lane.
So to try to help clarify, so signal timing is like a pie. And so if you do that, the intent behind the dual right is those dual rights run primarily with the left turn from 250 east. So we are able to run them simultaneously. If you run the through movement, we have to shut everything down to allow that through movement. So now when the 250 left turns run, we're only able to run one of those right turn lanes. So that right turn, you're taking away half that phase and adding another. So we're cutting into that pie of the overall time that we have. So even though it's not a lot of vehicles, it completely changes the signal phasing to where now on that side street phase, we only run half as much traffic because we can only run one of the lanes. And plus with signal timing, every phase requires 4 to 5 seconds of all yellow and 1 to 3 seconds of all red. So every cycle you're losing 8 more seconds, which over the course of an hour, Troy showed earlier 30 phase, we're losing 4 to 5 minutes of, time that we can move. So hopefully that helps with why the through and the right really. Did I answer? I'm sorry, I was facing forward. I didn't see who was talking to make sure I answered the question. So.
We're going to stick with the mic. Thank you. No, I don't want to stand up. Okay, bring it closely. I want to thank you're incredibly talented. Half of the stuff, I don't even understand what you're talking about. My concern is I live in Ednam. I just have a daughter who moved into Bel Air. Love it. Guys are sort of putting the cart before the horse. You're trying to put a Band-Aid once the throat has been slashed. I don't think we can, and using a little bit of money ain't going to help. Plus, how can you even think of there's not going to be any more traffic if the county is going to seriously consider building an apartment complex on Old Ivy Road for 500 apartments? Who knows how many people that is going to increase on Old Ivy Road? And you haven't addressed at all the other end of Old Ivy Road with the ancient little, where hardly 2 cars can even go through. So of course they're going to be heading back to this intersection. 500 apartments. How can we possibly even deal with this situation until we know what's going to happen with that?
thank you for all your work. I'm not demeaning you, but this is a problem that's been growing and growing and growing over the years. And now we think a few bucks are going to help it. Thank you.
The only thing that I'll say is from the original study, we identified interim projects to address what we could address and long-term projects. We never said that this is the end solution. Do nothing until we have the end solution is always an option.
Okay, so we're gonna go right here now.
My office is in Madison Park on Faulkner Drive, and, two concerns. One, I see a new bottleneck, not just with apartments, but with the traffic, people trying to get out of there. It's going to be at that intersection of Old Ivy and Faulkner. And the other thing I see is the fundamental problem here is the railroad bridge. It's the 2 lanes. And until, I don't know why we don't talk to CSX, if they could enlarge so that more than 2 lanes could get through there, I think it would solve a lot of these problems. And I don't know why we aren't looking at that, because everything else is going to squeeze all those cars. You know, you might make it 2 lane, it helps one way, but it's to the detriment of all these other people. I think you got to look at the big fundamental problem there, and I think it's the railroad bridge.
I mean, that is something that's going to be studied.
We'll look at that with the pipeline project.
Okay. So that was part of my question, because you could have 2 lanes when you reach the top of that little hill, but there's only room for this is on your part in it. Here we go. To get under. So that was the first comment I was going to make. LF made a point about the frequency of traffic going west once you have free flow. And today, for anybody, and I'd like to have $1 for every time I've driven this little ski slope under that trestle. For people coming off of 250 who are educated, when you're in that right lane and you're going along, you start to see brake lights up near the top of that where I think we should extend the off ramp. People pass that. People say, okay, I'm going to cause a hazard if I try to stop here. I'm going to get slammed from behind. And they do go down to the cloverleaf all the time. That's the move you make if you're educated in this area. So now all that traffic goes down, it comes up in a leaf, waits for the light, makes the left, wait for the next light, and goes west on 250. If you free flow that traffic so it can go right down and around and through, no one will ever get out of White Gables and Kenridge.
Just keep in mind, it's not free flow. It's not free flow traffic. They do have to stop at the signal.
That's the point. I'm Steve Blaine. I represent the 2 landlords that have. Can you hear me now? I represent the landlords that have 8 or 9 businesses right there, including Bel Air Market, operated by Tiger Fuel. And we're very concerned. Now, we appreciate the change in design from the free flow to the dual right, but we're not convinced that there's not going to be conflicts with through movements being unable to turn into those businesses. And as people know, there have been 6 or 8 of those businesses who've just recently made enormous investments to that location. Now, when we met with Kevin McDermott and Troy and Gordon Sutton, we expressed those concerns about a year ago. And we're still seeing that you're presenting a plan that creates a conflict. The other thing I would observe in the study that you say is a complete study, it doesn't take into account the university's corridor plan, nor does it take into account the trip generation from the proposed Ivy Gardens project.
The only thing I'll say about that is our proposal is not creating any conflict with the Bel Air Market that doesn't exist today.
Hi, I just want to ask your consultant one question. I went to the VDOT open house about 4 years or so ago about the replacement of the 601 bridge. And I find it strikingly strange that at this point in time, we would be talking about creating the triangle about right before we tear down that bridge. And it's gonna go from 2 lanes to 1 lane, and as I understand it, for anywhere from 14 to 16 months. So how you anticipate that the traffic coming southbound off of 29-250, turning left onto Garth to go on to Old Ivy is going to work when it's 1 lane baffles.
The only thing I will say is, as far as the timing goes, is we have money now. We can look at potential options, but that's a bigger part of the study that we're looking at with the pipeline project.
Okay, we're gonna move to next.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Jump and I live off of Old Ivy Road. And my concern about this plan is that it diverts even a single car onto Old Ivy Road, which it will increase the traffic. And at a time when we have development proposed, which has been mentioned, Ivy Gardens, and we have the corridor, there's just so much going on that we know about. To divert any more traffic to this road is not recommended. And so I just wanted to clarify, if I could, next steps here and time frame, because I heard you tonight say there'll be a larger area study, composite study, but I also heard you say that since there was funding, you said at one point this could be done very quickly.
That's the reason we got to where we're at. But yes, there is going to be a study. We're not building this right at this moment. So yeah, clarify that. We're not building this at this moment. But
hi, I'm Jerry Gorman. I live in Bel Air. From listening to what people have been saying, and I know you guys have so many variables to try to figure out, and it's all dynamic, but listening to what people are saying, the limiting factor might not be the throughput at that traffic light in front of Bel Air. It might well be the number of cars that can travel on 250 West. And based on that, the 2 proposals that you first introduced, one was benefiting by from 44 seconds to 26 seconds, which was quite an improvement of throughput on that traffic light. And then the second, which precluded a straight through into Bel Air, improved it from 44 to 13.5 seconds. I don't think it'll really matter if there's nowhere for those cars to travel west on 250. Right now, we've got 2 lanes converging into a 1-lane westbound onto 250. Your proposals, both of them, will make 3 lanes converging into 1 lane westbound onto 250. I just think that that is going to be the challenge. And maybe what we could consider is implementing the 44 to 26 second interchange where you allow people straight into Bel Air. And then if that shows to be the limiting factor, then move to just the right-hand turn. That would give you an option to a low-cost option to go to that second, exchange if that was necessary.
Yeah, I think your comment's good. And this is a consistent theme that I want to kind of address because I think there seems to be a concern about, the traffic on 250 versus the intersection. So this is kind of just a basic, we're traffic engineers, but traffic is not too dissimilar from water. So if you're familiar with water where you have valves and pipes, the joints are a sticking point. So the intersection is where you can only process so much. When you actually run a straight through pipe, your capacity goes higher. So where White Gables is, you would not necessarily be pushing more traffic through there than you already would. You would just get it through the intersection. And then you would still, like Troy said, there would still be gaps because we would still maintain the Bel Air side. And then you would still bounce back and forth between the yellow and all red time. So it's kind of it's a weird, I don't want to sound like a traffic engineering professor, but you can operate somewhere around, 1,500 to 2,000 cars on a lane that's continuous. But when you get into a signal, that can drop by as much as 30 to 40% based on your capacity. So the ability to move your movements efficiently is kind of part of that. So it sounds like there's a lot of concerns about that. And without being a geeky traffic engineer, I just wanted to make sure that we're cognizant of that. And that's not necessarily, like Troy's been trying to highlight, where the traffic would not increase. So it's not really the capacity that's a limiting factor there. So I'm not sure if that made sense, but tried to create an analogy that hopefully is helpful.
We're here.
My name is Punky File and I live in Bel Air. I traverse that intersection on a slow day, probably 5 times, on a busy day, 15 times. The one thing that has not been mentioned at this point is the speed at which people come off of Old Ivy Road to turn right to go towards Crozet. Almost no one stops right on red after, turns right on red after stop. They cruise through. If you have 2 lanes that are going through, the speed with that those cars are going to do, that is another factor that impacts the Bel Air Market, Kenridge, White Gables. Yes, you can get across to the suicide lane, but the entire time your heart is beating 150 beats a minute because of the speed at which people are traveling west on 250. So I encourage you to delay this project until you do that pipeline study and get a good grasp of the safety of not only for the vehicles, but for the people that live in that corridor between Birdwood, between Boar's Head Inn and down to the new entranceway to the university at Emmett Street. So please delay it, get that pipeline study done, and let's do it right. Thank you.
I like applause because it gives me time to walk.
Thank you. My name is Wes Adams. I'm a Bel Air resident and also a St. Anne's parent. So I suppose I'm one of the 10 that are crossing over there. But I was wondering, during your study of, and I apologize if this has been addressed, I came a little late, but the traffic going in and out of St. Anne's Belfield School there must be hundreds of cars going in and then dropping off and coming out twice a day. And without the ability to cross over to Falconer, that is a mandatory right-hand turn. Then they'll be turning again left to try to go back through between the railroad, that narrow railroad bridge, trying to get to, I mean, a lot of it will be parents. Many of it will be young drivers who are taking their siblings to school or are coming for sporting events in the afternoon. Do you think does your study take into account the volume of cars going in and out during the 7:30 to 8:30 timeframe in the morning and then 3 to 6 in the evening, and what it would do to that big circle between Old Garth Road, Falconer, Old Ivy Road, in and out of St. Anne's?
The quick answer is yes, the study does take it into account. One of the slides that I kind of breezed through pretty quick, I encourage everybody to go to the study webpage for VDOT and download this presentation, look at it closer. But one of the slides looks at and points out what the traffic counts are specifically at that intersection. I would just.
Hi, my name is Mignon Tucker. I'm president of the HOA of Huntington Village. I just wanted to thank you so much for all your hard work. Sean, thank you too for your wonderful announcement about the pipeline. And to Sean, on this future pipeline study, would you all ever consider just a study, not permanently, shutting down these problematic exits on Old Ivy Road so you can see the behavior of where the quote unquote water flows?
So my thought is I don't like to do anything for instance, with the solution here that was proposed, it was once said that we do it as an interim solution. If people don't like it, we take it out. I don't operate that way. For a situation.
Not an
like-
interim solution, just a study for maybe 2 weeks.
Yeah, but I don't know how if I close it down, that's a very problematic issue to close down an interest for 2 weeks as part of a study. I think we would have to model it. I don't think would ever physically close down anything.
Okay. So also, since this pipeline has been announced and we're all very, very happy pipeline study, I would, on behalf of everyone in this room, I think they would agree with me that perhaps we should slow down on approval of new developments until we can get all this infrastructure planned and implemented. And I say this to all the supervisors present. Thank you for your time.
So I just wanted to kind of clarify, because I keep talking about, are we doing it or are we not doing it? The honest truth is we don't have the authority to do it, the level that we're at in Culpeper District. I don't have the authority to turn a two-way street into a one-way street. So I don't have the authority to do that. We would need cooperation from the county to go to higher levels of approval to even do this. So I'm just going to say that right now. But I will tell you all, when pipeline stuff is not officially approved, it's going to be recommended. I need the same energy from you all, if we get awarded this project, to come out to help us figure this thing out. And it's not going to be easy at all. So some of these things you've seen are going to come back, and it's going to take all of us to figure this thing out. So that's my parting words.
Thanks, Sean. My name is Paul Sartori. I'm from White Gables Homeowners Association, live there. I'm hoping you also don't have the authority to turn a one lane into 2 lanes headed west outside nearby Bel Air intersection, right, for the time being anyway. I just want to make a basic observation is that we know you've got a really tough task, and I don't envy you guys at all. The traffic is bad. It's going to get worse. You can't have economic development without having greater traffic. I would just urge you to start considering adding to your criteria, not the speed of traffic flow, but the aspects around safety and general speed in general. In urban areas that have much higher concentrations of population, people actually are expected to go slow in traffic. And the idea that they should be going through fast just to make it convenient, I think is an inadequate criteria, and you might want to broaden that a little bit. Thank you.
The only thing I'll say is there's a difference between being efficient and processing more vehicles quicker and having them drive faster. They still have to make that right turn. So they're going to be going the same speeds they always go. Now, one thing I will say, often ways to make intersections safer is to remove movements because you're removing conflict points. We're removing conflict points with this option by removing the crossing movement of vehicles going straight through or making that left. Those are conflict points at intersections. I can get into a long, detailed discussion on conflict points, but one of the first things that safety traffic at is, are there any movements we can remove to reduce conflict points? And that's one way of improving safety. All of that should be studied in the pipeline study.
Hi, I'm Lou Spotswood and I live in White Gables. Hey, better? A long time ago, before I moved to White Gables, there was talk of us getting a stoplight. And then when Kenridge came in, I think the concept of the stoplight moved up to Kenridge and Birdwood because that's across. Why can't we just have a freaking stoplight there?
Okay, and I may pull Kevin into this, but the UVA Foundation paid for a warrant analysis for a traffic signal. You can't just install a traffic signal unless it's warranted. And from analysis, a traffic signal is not warranted there. So there's a whole study. Kevin has access to it. There's a whole study that went into it and looked at the traffic counts, and it's not warranted. And last fall, is that when it was? It was last fall. Well, okay. I'll leave that with the county, but typically if traffic patterns haven't changed significantly, the results of the study is going to be the same.
Okay, so we have one more question to stay on topic or on task of our ending, but everyone up here does have, especially Troy, has contact information that he'd be so happy to share with you afterwards.
Hi, Elizabeth File Matthews from Bel Air. Thank you guys again for spending so much time explaining this project to us and for listening. Number one, thank you. Number two, Sean, this question is for you and maybe Albemarle County. I'm really not sure how you guys work together on these different projects, but I did notice on the county website that there are some corridors that have specific advisory boards associated with them for long range or pipeline type programs. And I wondered if we could possibly be a candidate for that type of oversight so that the community members don't have to beat up on Troy every 6 months. Thank you.
It comes with the territory.
So as a matter of fact, we do have a Route 250 task force that was created many years ago to look at development on this. I know we have some members of that. The committee has not met in a while. It was put on hold during COVID and they have not come back yet. But I think that this could offer a good opportunity for us to bring that committee together again. And the members of that is a board appointed committee. So we'd have to take a look at the membership we have now, see if there's any available seats. But I actually am aware that there were folks in Bel Air that were part of that committee in the past. So you do have representation on that, but we will take another look. And if there's openings, those would be advertised through our typical board opening advertisement system. For studies, we do often put together stakeholder committees that we identify key stakeholders in the area for. So we would probably look at that for something like the pipeline study, or look at other already existing groups like the 250 West Task Force. But we will make a decision on that, and there will be stakeholders involved in this process if it moves forward.
Okay, so lastly, I do want to say thank you to everyone for coming today on behalf of everybody up here. These kinds of discussions are so valuable, and having the opportunity to speak your mind, hear answers. It's nice to come out of COVID and do this in real life again. So we have that. If you not able to get your question addressed and it's burning and you just got to write it down, I do have some sticky notes and this white notepad up here. Please feel free to come up here, jot it down, stick it up on the notepad, and we'll make sure that Troy and all of his friends get it. Again, thank you so much for coming.